Alrighty guys, so continuing where we left off on Friday, I'm going to kind of take us through a quick review of what we talked about on Friday, and then we'll finish up the lecture today, and then we'll start a review for our test, and then it'll be Christmas. All kinds of exciting. Alright, so we talked about what exactly pathology and infection and disease were. So remember, patho meaning disease and ology meaning study of, so we're looking at the study of diseases. Again, the more interesting part of micro. We looked at that infection and disease are not the same, even though a lot of people use the word interchangeably. Infection is talking about you have microorganisms that are living in you and that have colonized everything, and then disease is the result of them coming in or a change in health status in some other way. We talked about the normal flora that we have within our bodies that kind of helps us do different processes. We need them there. They help us produce, different vitamins and minerals, and we need them. And they keep other bacteria at bay, so they're not killing us or causing disease within us. So we like them there. We talked about opportunistic pathogens. So these are when either the normal flora is disturbed and they're no longer there, or you are just already sick and you have a bacteria or microorganism that just decides that now is the time to cause another infection on top of that. That's the opportunistic ones. They only when stuff is not working right in our body and is not correct. There was the different disease types that we talked about. We said we were going to focus on the infectious ones. We don't really care if they're, as of right now, we don't really care if there's the degenerative or the genetic diseases out there. Talked about signs and symptoms and the difference between that. So symptoms, again, was objective data that was provided. It was subjective data that was provided by the patient stating, I'm in pain, which we can't prove. And then you had signs, which were objective data of things we could prove, such as you had a fever or your leg was dangling off your body, kind of thing. And then we talked about communicable versus non-communicable diseases. So communicable was meaning that it could spread easily from person to person. So things like the flu, chickenpox. And then we had non-communicable diseases, which is a microorganism invaded our body, caused disease, but we're not going to be coughing and spreading tetanus everywhere. Then we had incidence and prevalence. So incidence was how many people had acquired that disease within a certain time period, whereas prevalence was how many people had acquired it plus the people who already had it in a year. And we discussed AIDS with that. Then we had frequency of disease, so sporadic meaning handful of people here and there had it. Endemic, more of a certain population had it, such as like the town of Wills Point had an endemic of the flu. And then epidemic was it was more widespread. So the United States had a really bad case of the flu. And then pandemic is worldwide. So that was talking about like AIDS is a pandemic. And then we talked about the severity of the disease. So you could have an acute disease, meaning that it happens really quickly, comes on really quickly, doesn't last very long, and then it's gone. So, the week of having the flu is an acute disease, whereas chronic was something that was over a very long time period. So we discussed tuberculosis and hepatitis B. Those are infections that you're going to have for basically the rest of your life that you're going to have to deal with. And then we had the latent diseases, which were the ones that you have a disease, you get over it, and it sits and it waits, and then it comes back. So we were talking about chickenpox and shingles with that one. And then we left off with herd immunity, and I know the stupid recording thing jacked up my video, but there was also a link to the video, so y'all should have watched that, so you could actually have audio to it instead of just watching pictures go by. So the herd immunity was where, not everybody can have vaccinations or be immune to a particular disease. And so herd immunity will protect those individuals anyways because everyone around them is immune or protected from the disease. And then there's just the idiots who don't get vaccines and screw everything up. But again, that's a different subject. So let's continue on with where we were at. And yeah. All right. So when we talk about diseases, we want to know how much the host is actually involved. So it can be a local infection, meaning it's just a small area of the body. So like a boil or an abscess would just be an infection in one little tiny part of your body. So if you get a paper cut, it gets infected. That would be a local infection. Where you can have a systemic or generalized infection where it's being spread throughout the entire body, and then you have more of a problem. So anything that can get into the blood system or the lymphatic system and be spread throughout the whole body, that would be a systemic infection. And sometimes in the hospitals, we talked about where you have infection within your whole body, and we refer to that as sepsis. And then specifically when you have bacteria, any sort of microorganisms living within your blood, we call it septicemia, because septicemia is talking about the sepsis, and then emia is talking about blood, or it is also called blood poisoning. And then when you're specifically talking about bacteria being in the blood, then that's bacteremia. So obviously it can go from something tiny, such as a paper cut that's infected, to something major, as you have bacteria swirling around in your blood that's being carried everywhere. And those patients are very, very sick and have to be in the hospital for a long time on major either antibiotics or whatever is causing their infection, and they're going to be in the hospital for a very long time. And then, so not just talking about how much area it's taken over, but whether it's the primary or secondary infection. So primary meaning first, so that's going to be the first infection that happens or the initial illness. And then you can have a secondary infection, which again, those opportunistic pathogens are going to step in. So your defenses are already weakened because you had the primary infection, and then you have a secondary infection that comes in that's going to take advantage of the fact that your defenses are not where they need to be and can cause infection on top of that. So now you're dealing with two different infections, so that's nice. So a lot of secondary infections are going to happen on the skin and in the respiratory tract, and sometimes those are actually the ones that are going to kill you versus the actual primary infection that happened in the first place. So this is all scary. Makes you never want to leave your house again and live in a bubble. We also have what's called subclinical or inapparent infections. So you can have an infection that you don't even know about. So that's even more fun. You can be a carrier, which we'll discuss in just a little bit exactly what a carrier is, of a particular virus or disease, and you can be spreading it unbeknownst to you to all the lovely little people in your life, and you didn't even know you were sick or had anything wrong with you. So this is how diseases will spread.